Across northern Europe's peat bogs lie some of archaeology's most unsettling discoveries. Hundreds of perfectly preserved human bodies, some dating back 2,400 years yet maintaining lifelike appearance. These bog bodies represent a unique preservation phenomenon, creating what appears to be time capsules of ancient death. The Tallinn Man, discovered in Denmark in 1950, epitomizes this preservation. His facial features remain so intact that investigators initially believed he was a recent murder victim rather than an Iron Age man who died around 400 BCE. His eyelashes, stubble, and fingerprints remain clearly visible, while his peaceful expression suggests he was unconscious or sleeping when executed by hanging, the rope still encircling his neck after 2 millennia. This extraordinary preservation results from the bog's specific chemistry. The combination of highly acidic water, pH 3.2 to 4.5, cold temperatures, and absence of oxygen creates an environment where bacteria cannot survive, while tannic and humic acids naturally present in peat, perform a tanning process similar to leather production. This process preserves skin, hair, and other external features while simultaneously dissolving internal organs and bones, essentially creating hollow, leather-like shells of the deceased. Forensic examination reveals disturbing details about these ancient deaths. Most bog bodies show evidence of overkill, multiple forms of execution applied to a single victim. Lindo Man, discovered in England in 1984, had been struck in the head, garroted, and had his throat cut before placement in the bog. Old Croghan Man, found in Ireland, had his nipples sliced off, a ritual humiliation in Celtic culture signifying removal of kingship claims. Archaeological evidence strongly suggests these were not ordinary burials but ritual sacrifices during agricultural crises. Stomach content analysis reveals many consumed a specific final meal containing mistletoe and ergot-infected grains, likely inducing hallucinogenic states before execution. Isotope studies show many were high-status individuals, not criminals, suggesting voluntary sacrifice of community leaders during times of severe hardship. Their extraordinary preservation allows us to literally look into the faces of ancient religious practices typically accessible only through fragmentary historical accounts. Beneath England's desolate Dartmoor moors, a network of narrow tin mining passages known as woofers creates one of acoustic's most disturbing phenomena. These ancient tunnels, some dating to the 13th century, produce what locals call the screaming, human-like vocalizations occurring when specific wind conditions interact with the cave's unique geometry. Mining records from 1883 document a particularly tragic origin for one such cave system near Wistman's Wood. 12 miners became trapped after a collapse, surviving 6 days in a gradually flooding chamber. Rescuers, just meters away but separated by immovable granite, reported hearing their increasingly desperate cries transition from coherent pleas to animalistic shrieks as oxygen depleted and hypothermia set in. All 12 perished before rescue was possible. What transforms this from historical tragedy to ongoing phenomenon is the cave's extraordinary acoustic properties. The particular dimensions of this tunnel system, averaging 1.2 meters wide with precise angular joins, create standing wave patterns that capture and preserve sound frequencies matching the human vocal range. When moisture levels and temperature gradients align with specific wind directions, typically during autumn equinox storms, the tunnel system essentially replays these centuries-old vocalizations. Audio engineers from Cambridge University documented these sounds in 1976, confirming they weren't merely wind effects but actual human frequency patterns. Spectrographic analysis revealed vocal formants consistent with extreme distress calls. More disturbing was the progressive nature of the playback, beginning with recognizable words before deteriorating into what the research team described as terminal vocalization patterns consistent with hypoxia and hypothermia. The scientific explanation involves infrasonic resonance within the cave system's specific dimensions, combined with water condensation patterns that effectively store acoustic energy like primitive phonograph cylinders. Similar phenomena have been documented in ancient Greek oracles and certain Maya temples, suggesting our ancestors potentially utilized these acoustic properties deliberately in religious contexts. The Dartmoor instance remains unique, however, in its documentation of actual historical victims whose final moments continue reverberating through geological time. At 16,470 feet, 5,020 meters in the Indian Himalayas lies Rupkund, a glacial lake holding a macabre secret revealed only when its frozen surface melts during brief summer periods. The shallow basin contains the skeletal remains of over 600 individuals who died simultaneously in a catastrophic event dating to approximately 850 CE. When first documented by a British forest ranger in 1942, the site presented a nightmare tableau. Hundreds of skulls and long bones protruding from melting ice with scraps of preserved flesh and hair still attached to some specimens. Most disturbing were the injuries. Almost every skull showed identical damage patterns. Deep circular depressions concentrated on the crown and shoulders without fracturing the surrounding bone. Forensic analysis revealed these were not war casualties or epidemic victims as initially suspected. Instead, the wounds matched precisely with experimental damage created by hailstones exceeding 9 centimeters, 3.5 inches, in diameter, falling at terminal velocity. Ancient ice core samples from nearby glaciers confirmed an extreme localized hailstorm occurred during the estimated death period, with stones large enough to penetrate bronze helmets. The victims were primarily pilgrims traveling along a sacred Hindu route, caught in a narrow mountain pass during this freak meteorological event with no shelter. The lake's unique chemistry, highly alkaline due to surrounding limestone, preserves the bones while simultaneously dissolving softer tissues through saponification, essentially converting fats into a soap-like substance. This selective preservation creates an ongoing archaeological phenomenon, where each summer melt reveals new, perfectly preserved skeletal elements. Modern climate change has accelerated the melt cycle, exposing more remains annually than at any point in the site's history. DNA analysis has yielded another surprise. The victims represent at least 3 distinct genetic groups from different parts of ancient India, suggesting they were strangers united only by their pilgrimage and ultimate fate. Local folklore had preserved this catastrophe in songs warning of the goddess Nanda Devi's wrath manifesting as hard as iron ice from the sky, demonstrating the remarkable accuracy of oral tradition in recording ancient disasters. For over 4,000 years, the sacred city of Varanasi has served as Hinduism's most auspicious place to die, with devout believers bringing their dying relatives to this spiritual nexus along the Ganges River. According to tradition, cremation on its banks and dispersal of ashes in its waters breaks the cycle of reincarnation, liberating the soul. However, this ancient practice has created one of the world's most macabre waterways. Daily, approximately 300 bodies are cremated on Varanasi's Ghats, riverside steps, each requiring 300 to 400 kilograms of wood. For impoverished families unable to afford sufficient timber, partial cremation occurs. The body burns incompletely before being committed to the river. Consequently, dozens of partially burned corpses enter the Ganges daily, alongside 200-plus completely uncremated bodies of sadhus, holy men, pregnant women, children under 12, and victims of snake bites or leprosy, who by tradition are committed directly to the water without burning. These remains create a unique ecological phenomenon. During monsoon season, when river volume increases, bodies move downstream. However, during dry periods, corpses often return to the surface due to decomposition gases and circulate near the city. Local boatmen routinely navigate around these grim obstacles, while specialized workers called dom manage the remains, often weighing them down with stones when they resurface inappropriately. The river has adapted biologically to this constant influx of human tissue. It contains unique bacteriophages, viruses that infect bacteria, that prevent decomposition-related pathogens from reaching dangerous levels. These specialized microorganisms evolved specifically in response to millennia of human remains processing. Water samples reveal high concentrations of these protective viruses near cremation ghats. Despite containing approximately 3,000 times the safe level of fecal coliform bacteria and numerous partially decomposed bodies, the Ganges water is collected in bottles as Ganga Jal, sacred water used in Hindu rituals throughout India. Believers attribute supernatural purification properties to the river, noting that despite rational scientific expectations, disease outbreaks directly linked to corpse exposure remain surprisingly rare, creating a spiritual and epidemiological paradox that continues to intrigue both religious scholars and microbiologists. Among Antarctica's deadliest phenomena are its katabatic winds, gravity-driven air masses that accelerate down steep terrain, reaching speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour, 320 kilometers per hour. These aren't ordinary strong winds, but rather physics-defying meteorological monsters that create conditions unlike anywhere else on Earth, capable of abrading human skin from bone in minutes. These winds originate when dense cold air forms over Antarctica's elevated interior ice plateaus. This super-chilled air mass begins flowing downhill under gravity's influence, accelerating through mountain channels and gaining destructive velocity. What makes these winds uniquely dangerous is their temperature, often below minus 70 degrees Celsius, minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit, combined with their extreme speed and the microscopic ice crystals they carry. During the 1911 to 1914 Australasian Antarctic expedition, meteorologist Morton Moyes documented the physiological effects of these winds in horrifying detail. Exposed flesh would first freeze solid in seconds, then begin to ablate as ice crystals in the wind effectively sandblasted the frozen tissue. Expedition members caught unprotected in these conditions lost facial features and extremities not merely to frostbite but to physical erosion. Their frozen tissue literally sanded away layer by layer. The expedition's physician, Archibald MacLean, recorded cases where wind exposure created wounds indistinguishable from severe burns, with skin and subcutaneous tissue completely removed from underlying muscle. In extreme cases, fingers and ears were not just frozen but physically reduced in size, as tissue was systematically stripped away by the ice-laden winds. Modern Antarctic researchers utilize special protective gear developed from aerospace technology, as conventional cold-weather clothing proves inadequate against this unique combination of extreme cold and abrasive force. The Commonwealth Bay region holds the title for Earth's windiest sea-level location, precisely because of these katabatic effects, with average wind speeds exceeding hurricane force on over 340 days annually. Even today, despite advanced equipment and forecasting, approximately one Antarctic researcher per decade suffers catastrophic tissue damage from brief wind exposure, a stark reminder of nature's uncompromising physics. In the unassuming town of Stull, Kansas, stands a derelict stone church whose ruined walls have been documented bleeding during severe thunderstorms since at least 1874. The substance, a viscous rust-colored liquid that emerges from between the mortar joints, displays properties unnervingly similar to human blood, including coagulation when exposed to air and separation into serum-like clear fluid and darker material resembling red blood cells. Geological analysis provides a partial explanation. The church was constructed using limestone with unusually high iron oxide content, which leaches out during heavy rains. However, multiple chemical analyses have failed to fully account for the liquid's composition, particularly its organic components and behavioral similarity to blood. The substance contains hemoglobin-like proteins that have not been conclusively identified, despite multiple laboratory examinations. What transforms this from geological curiosity to disturbing phenomenon is the liquid's appearance pattern. The bleeding occurs exclusively during electrical storms and primarily from sections of wall near the church's former altar space. More puzzling is the substance's temperature, consistently measured at 36.5 degrees Celsius, 97.7 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of ambient conditions, precisely matching human body temperature. Local folklore connects the phenomenon to the church's dark history. In 1862, the building reportedly served as an emergency field hospital during a particularly brutal Civil War skirmish. Historical records confirm that over 40 soldiers died within its walls, many from catastrophic wounds. According to local accounts, blood from these casualties saturated the newly laid mortar, becoming incorporated into the building's very structure. Scientists suggest the most likely explanation involves a rare combination of iron-rich minerals, specific bacterial colonies that produce hemoglobin-like compounds, and geomagnetic effects triggered by lightning. However, this theory fails to explain the consistent temperature or why similar buildings in the region don't exhibit the same phenomenon. The church remains a subject of ongoing scientific investigation, with researchers from Kansas State University's Geology Department conducting regular sampling during storms. During Australia's gold rush era of the 1890s, the hastily established mining town of Coolgardie faced a macabre ecological phenomenon that horrified residents and became folklore throughout the outback. Gravediggers opening plots for secondary burials discovered previously interred corpses had been partially consumed, with coffins invaded by abnormally large cane toads, Rhinella marina, that had somehow accessed the remains. These toads, introduced to control agricultural pests, discovered that shallow graves in the sandy soil provided both shelter from the harsh desert climate and a reliable food source. The amphibians developed specialized burrowing behaviors specifically to access decomposing human remains. What particularly disturbed witnesses was the toad's unnatural growth. Specimens recovered from graves measured up to 38 centimeters, 15 inches, and weighed nearly 2 kilograms, roughly triple their normal size. Scientific analysis later revealed that human decomposition creates a unique nutrient profile particularly suited to amphibian metabolism. The high protein content of human tissue, combined with concentrated calcium from deteriorating bones, accelerated the toad's growth while extending their lifespan. Cemetery specimens lived 3 times longer than their wild counterparts. Most disturbing were the adaptations observed in cemetery populations. These toads developed specialized digestive enzymes specifically for processing human tissue and modified hunting behaviors. They would gather near fresh graves within hours of burial, sensing the chemical signatures of newly interred bodies. Township records indicate that between 1893 and 1897, approximately 30 graves were affected, leading to the implementation of concrete burial vaults despite their considerable expense in the remote location. While cane toads typically consume insects and small vertebrates, cemetery populations showed a decisive preference for human remains when available. Modern herpetologists consider this a dramatic example of dietary adaptation in an invasive species, demonstrating how rapidly animals can evolve specialized behaviors when presented with novel food sources, even those as unsettling as human remains. In February 1959, 9 experienced Soviet hikers died under profoundly mysterious circumstances in the northern Ural Mountains. The victims, all skilled outdoors people led by Igor Dyatlov, were found scattered across the snow, some barefoot and partially undressed despite temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius, others with catastrophic internal injuries but no external wounds. Their tent had been cut open from inside and their frozen expressions showed signs of extreme terror. Soviet investigators documented bizarre anomalies that defy conventional explanation. The hikers' bodies contained elevated radiation levels. Autopsies revealed crushed ribs and skulls with force comparable to car accidents, yet no defensive wounds. Most perplexing were their positions. Some appeared to have been carefully arranged after death, while others died mid-stride in postures suggesting they were fleeing something unseen. Forensic analysis of the snow revealed the group had fled in a precise line, placing their bare feet exactly in each other's footprints to minimize exposure. This indicates rational thinking despite their seemingly irrational abandonment of protective gear. One victim's tongue had been removed, while another's eyes were missing. Official reports concluded they died from a compelling natural force, but classified additional findings for decades. Modern theories include infrasound-induced panic, low-frequency sound waves created by specific wind patterns causing extreme psychological distress, military testing gone wrong, the area was near secret Soviet installations, or a rare meteorological phenomenon called Kármán vortex shedding that can create powerful localized downdrafts. Indigenous Mansi people avoided the location, calling it Mountain of the Dead, centuries before the incident. The most scientifically plausible explanation involves a small, localized avalanche combined with hypothermia-induced paradoxical undressing, a documented phenomenon where freezing victims remove clothing due to false heat sensations. However, this fails to account for the radiation, the internal injuries without external trauma, and why these experienced winter hikers would cut their tent instead of using the entrance. Among parasitology's most disturbing examples lies Cemathoa exigua, an isopod crustacean with a unique evolutionary strategy that's equally ingenious and horrifying. This marine parasite targets specific fish species, particularly the spotted rose snapper, entering through the gills before attaching to the base of the host's tongue. Once positioned, the parasite implements a meticulous biological hijacking. It severs the blood vessels supplying the fish's tongue using specialized mandibles, causing the organ to gradually atrophy and die from lack of circulation. As the original tongue withers, the parasite anchors itself permanently to the remaining stub using hook-like appendages. The parasite's body, growing up to 3 centimeters long, then functionally replaces the tongue, positioning itself in the exact orientation of the original organ. What makes this relationship unique in parasitology is that Cemathoa doesn't simply destroy tissue. It substitutes itself as a functional prosthetic. The fish continues using this new tongue for feeding, unaware that the imposter organ is actually a separate living creature. The parasite benefits by consuming mucus and small food particles, essentially taking a percentage of every meal while providing marginal tongue functionality in return. First documented scientifically in 1923, fishermen along the Gulf of California had known about these demon tongues for centuries. Affected fish show no significant survival disadvantage beyond slightly reduced feeding efficiency. The parasite represents the only known case in nature where one organism functionally replaces another's organ. Particularly unsettling is the parasite's morphological convergence. It has evolved to mimic the shape and positioning of the original tongue so precisely that researchers initially struggled to identify infected specimens without close examination. Recent studies suggest the parasite secretes immunosuppressive compounds that prevent the host from rejecting this living implant. Throughout Victorian England, cemetery groundskeepers documented a disturbing phenomenon that science initially struggled to explain: spontaneous explosions within sealed family mausoleums and burial vaults. These incidents typically occurred 6 to 8 months after interment, particularly during summer months when temperatures rose. The mechanics behind these macabre explosions stem from normal decomposition processes occurring in abnormal environments. When bodies decompose in sealed chambers rather than in soil, gases, primarily methane and hydrogen sulfide, accumulate with nowhere to escape. A single human corpse produces approximately 30 liters of gas during decomposition. In a family vault containing multiple coffins, this creates a potentially explosive atmosphere. The Victorian practice of using lead-lined coffins and hermetically sealed stone crypts created perfect gas chambers. When methane concentrations reach 5 to 15% of the air volume, any spark, often caused by iron oxidation in coffin hardware or static electricity during thunderstorms, could trigger detonation. The resulting explosions shattered coffins, damaged crypt walls, and, in particularly gruesome cases, scattered partially decomposed remains throughout the structure. After several cemetery workers were injured by these blasts in the 1860s, London's Metropolitan Burial Board commissioned an investigation. Engineer Joseph Bazalgette, who also designed London's sewer system, developed the first corpse gas ventilation systems, discrete pipes installed through mausoleum walls with specialized charcoal filters to neutralize odors. These safety measures were eventually incorporated into building codes for burial structures throughout Europe. Modern cemetery maintenance still includes inspection of these historic venting systems, though contemporary embalming practices have reduced explosion risks. However, in areas where traditional sealed entombment continues without proper ventilation, occasional reports of these disturbing detonations persist, particularly in Mediterranean countries during extreme summer heat waves. In 1886, British archaeologist Alexander Hammond participated in the unwrapping of an Egyptian mummy at the British Museum, a common Victorian spectacle. As linen bandages were removed from the 3,000-year-old remains of a high priest, Hammond leaned forward to examine hieroglyphic tattoos and inadvertently inhaled a cloud of ancient dust. Within days, he developed severe respiratory symptoms. Within a week, he was dead. Medical examination revealed his lungs were riddled with an aggressive fungal infection, later identified as Aspergillus niger, a mold that had remained dormant but viable in the mummy's wrappings for 3 millennia. The fungal spores adapted to the dry conditions of ancient Egyptian tombs, had evolved remarkable preservation mechanisms, entering a cryptobiotic state, essentially suspended animation, until moisture, warmth, and nutrients became available. Hammond's moist lung tissue provided the perfect reanimation environment. Once inhaled, the ancient spores activated within hours, germinating and spreading through his respiratory system with extraordinary speed. Contemporary physicians were baffled by the infection's resistance to all available treatments. Modern analysis suggests the ancient fungal strain possessed natural antibiotic properties that evolved to combat competing microorganisms in tomb environments, inadvertently making them resistant to 19th-century medical interventions. This incident contributed significantly to the curse of the pharaohs mythos, though the actual mechanism was purely biological. Following Hammond's death, the British Museum implemented the first archaeological respiratory protocols requiring masks during handling of ancient remains. Similar cases were documented in the early 20th century, including noted Egyptologist Howard Carter's team members who succumbed to similar infections after the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Today, specialized HEPA filtration systems are standard procedure during mummy examinations, protecting researchers from what Egyptians might have considered the breath of the dead. Deep in Borneo's rainforest thrives a macabre botanical wonder, the Nepenthes raja, a carnivorous pitcher plant whose massive fluid-filled traps can exceed 3.5 liters in volume. While typically consuming insects and small rodents, these evolved predators occasionally encounter human remains with disturbing consequences. In 1988, a Malaysian botanical survey documented 3 instances where human fingers and toes were discovered dissolving inside these giant pitchers. Investigations revealed they belonged to lost hikers who had died from falls or exposure in the treacherous terrain. As bodies decomposed, smaller extremities separated and either fell directly into the pitchers or were carried there by scavenging animals. These plants produce a specialized cocktail of digestive enzymes including proteases, chitinases, and nucleases, compounds specifically evolved to break down proteins, exoskeletons, and genetic material. When human tissue enters this digestive fluid, it undergoes the same process as any other prey. The plant's digestive chemistry gradually dissolves soft tissues, leaving only small bones behind, which eventually sink to the bottom of the pitcher as sediment. What makes this phenomenon particularly unsettling is the plant's adaptation to human presence. Scientists have documented that Nepenthes specimens growing near human settlements or trekking paths produce more powerful digestive enzymes than their isolated counterparts. This suggests an evolutionary response to occasional human tissue consumption. Indigenous Penan people recognized this adaptation centuries ago, identifying certain pitcher plants as finger eaters in their folklore and avoiding areas where these variants grow abundantly. Modern research has found that nutrients absorbed from human tissue significantly accelerate the plant's growth rate compared to their insect-exclusive relatives. Beneath the picturesque landscape of Rotorua, New Zealand lies a deadly geological phenomenon, superheated, highly acidic mud pools. These seemingly innocuous bubbling pits reach temperatures exceeding 200 degrees Celsius, 392 degrees Fahrenheit, with pH levels as low as 2.1, similar to concentrated lemon juice but vastly more dangerous due to the heat. In 1910, an unfortunate British tourist named Roger Hamilton slipped past safety barriers to photograph the pools up close. Witnesses watched in horror as he lost his footing on the slick volcanic soil and plunged waist-deep into the boiling mud. His screams lasted only seconds before shock set in. Rescuers couldn't approach due to the unstable ground and extreme heat. By the time specialized equipment arrived 40 minutes later, Hamilton's lower body had essentially dissolved. The horrifying chemistry of these pools creates a perfect storm for human tissue destruction. The combination of sulfuric acid and extreme heat rapidly breaks down soft tissues while leaving denser bone structures temporarily intact. The mud's viscosity prevents victims from easily escaping even if conscious. Park rangers report that objects immersed in these pools emerge unnaturally clean, stripped of all organic material through an accelerated combination of cooking and acid digestion. Modern safety measures have reduced casualties, but the pools claim approximately 1 life per decade. In 2020, geothermal scientists discovered that microorganisms called extremophiles actually thrive in these deadly conditions, metabolizing the very chemicals that dissolve human flesh. These thermoacidophiles represent some of Earth's oldest life forms, surviving in conditions that perfectly preserve their ancient evolutionary adaptations while remaining lethal to nearly everything else. August 1951 transformed the peaceful French village of Pont-Saint-Esprit into a scene of mass hysteria and terror. Over 250 villagers suddenly experienced violent hallucinations, convulsions, and vomiting. 5 died and dozens were institutionalized. The culprit was the staple of French life: bread. The village's baguettes and loaves had been contaminated with ergot, a fungus that infects rye and contains natural LSD-like compounds. Survivors recalled nightmarish visions, animals morphing into grotesque monsters, their own bodies catching fire, or invisible insects crawling beneath their skin. One man believed he was an airplane, leaping from his second-story bedroom with arms outstretched, fracturing both legs. Another ran through the streets screaming that his heart had become a snake writhing inside his chest. Desperate villagers clawed at their own bodies, broke through restraints in the local asylum, and jumped into the Rhone River seeking relief from imaginary flames. Medical professionals were baffled by the symptoms' intensity, initially suspecting mercury poisoning before identifying the ergot connection. The same fungus likely caused numerous cases of dancing mania throughout medieval Europe, once attributed to demonic possession. Some conspiracy theorists later suggested the CIA had used the village for MK Ultra experiments. Though evidence overwhelmingly supports the ergot theory, a horrifying reminder of nature's capacity to alter human perception. In September 1945, farmer Lloyd Olson of Fruita, Colorado, was preparing dinner when he decapitated a Wyandotte rooster named Mike. To his astonishment, the bird survived. Due to a precise axe stroke, Mike's brainstem remained largely intact, along with one ear. This anatomical miracle allowed the rooster to maintain most bodily functions despite missing nearly its entire head. For the next 18 months, Mike became a national sensation and touring sideshow attraction, earning the equivalent of $50,000 per month in today's money. Lloyd fed Mike a mixture of milk and water directly into his esophagus using an eyedropper. Small grains of corn were also occasionally added to this strange feeding ritual. The bird's reflex functions remained operational. He could still attempt to preen his feathers, peck for food with his neck stump, and even tried to crow, though the resulting sound was a gurgling noise. Scientists from the University of Utah studied this phenomenon, concluding that a clot had sealed the wound, preventing Mike from bleeding to death. The remaining brainstem contained the bird's essential functions. Mike was valued at $10,000 during his heyday, equivalent to nearly $150,000 today, before finally succumbing in Phoenix, Arizona, when he choked during a feeding.